Welcome. My name is India Nielsen Barfus, and I'm a program manager in the Utah Office of Outdoor Recreation. Thank you for joining us for this morning's Summit Speaker Series. We're going to learn about the 2021 North American Camping Report, including information about new campers from 2020, the ways people are camping, changing demographics, as well as camping predictions moving forward. So it's a lot of really interesting information. And I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Scott Barr, who has more than 25 years of market research and analytical experience in measuring and profiling consumer behavior and preferences in marketing and advertising development, product development, and strategic planning. Scott is the president of Cairn Consulting Group, which has been the research partner for the North American Camping Report for the past 5 years. And he's also worked with organizations in the outdoor and outdoor recreation sectors in their marketing and branding efforts, strategic planning, customer experience, corporate social responsibility, services and amenities, and employee development. So Scott, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for presenting all this fabulous research to us. I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you. And if anyone has any questions, like I say, put them into the chat at any point, and we'll turn that turn time over to questions in about 40 minutes. Scott?
Great, thank you. So, my presentation isn't showing up on my list again. I apologize.
I will get up on my screen.
I'll try it again. For some reason, it doesn't like PowerPoint. Sorry about that. I have no idea why. Everything else shows up but my presentation.
All right, can you see this all right?
Perfect.
Okay,
thanks,
perfect.
India.
Yeah.
So yeah, just for a brief intro on the actual report itself. They're sponsored by KOA because, and I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge their support. They've supported this effort for the last, was it 7 years now, and this is independent. We do conduct this research independently, but they support it, and it is a service to the industry. And again, it's something that when this originally started, that the goal was that we all can get better at what we do, and there was a gap in information. So that's just the brief background, and again, an acknowledgement there. Thanks for bearing with me on that. So, and you can go ahead and move on to the next slide too, India, please. Okay, so just to jump right in, I wanted to just look at what kind of what happened and what we're looking at right now. In 2020, we all know it was a different year. There was, I guess that's the understatement that you'll hear today. But it was very different. We had a lot of new campers come in 2020. I'm sure that anyone who works in outdoor recreation knows that. They see it. They're still seeing it. So we had 48 million camping households in 2020. Now, we've done some interim research since the overall report came out, and we're looking at the year ahead. So for the first time, we were going to do a forecast last year, and then COVID hit, and then we said we're not releasing that. But right now, this is a fairly conservative estimate. We're looking at 53 million households in 2021. That's a lot more people, especially when you put it on top of what happened last year. So there's a lot of people who are starting to camp, people who are coming back to camping, and some different people who never did it before, and they're finally trying it. But we'll revise this. We're going to start putting out a monthly report on our estimates and projections, as well as some things that destinations and such for camping as we go along. So be on the lookout for that. If anyone is interested, please get in touch with me, and I'll point you in the right direction to get that. But so yeah. Anyway, just to kind of put a bow on that, we're kind of looking at 15 million new camper households over 2020 and 2021. When you figure that there's an average of 2.5 people per household. That's a lot of people who are camping and going outdoors. So next slide, please. Thanks. And this again, I just, to touch base on this, the graphic shows very clearly. We were typically talking about, on an average of about 5% of all campers were new in any given year. This last year it was 21%. So that, again, when you start applying those to the numbers that we were just talking about, that's a lot of new households. So 21%, again, that includes, once again, bringing back into the fold people who didn't camp before. So, again, that newness, everybody's seen it. We're seeing overflowing campgrounds, people camping everywhere. It's obvious. But again, the newness of it is something that we're all going to have to address, both the good and the bad that comes with that. And so far in 2021, we're asking people, what things are looking like. And, I know that's a little bit hard to read, but there's about 8%, we're looking at about 8% of U.S. households are considering camping this year, or planning to camp in 2021 for the first time. So that's kind of that projection I did on the previous page. That's kind of where that comes from. So that 8% is still higher. And again, when you combine that with what's happened, there's a lot of new people coming into camping. So next slide, please. And this slide here, I wanted to, very quickly, give a snapshot of what it looks like, what we're kind of attributing, these increases to. So if you look at, the 10 million new camper households last year, 7.7 million of those we're attributing to COVID, to the pandemic, brought those in, because we would have expected about 2.4 million new households based on what had been happening in previous years. So again, that pandemic pushed a lot of people out into the outdoors. And I also wanted to just kind of address briefly here the idea of, and we'll talk about this in a little bit too, the accommodations and how the camping sector is adjusting to all these new people. And a lot of these adjustments were already in place. We've seen the proliferation of glamping campgrounds, facilities, or just glamping sites within campgrounds. But the market was kind of prepared a little bit more to take some of the heat by offering those glamping facilities this past year, and just looking at the new campers accounted for by glamping. Almost 5 million households probably went camping for the first time this last year because glamping facilities were available to them. So, and when you look, so that, again, brought gave people kind of a soft place to land. So next slide, please.
I'm going to switch. I downloaded the PowerPoint. I'm going to switch over to that quickly for the screen share. Just hopefully it can show full screen that way. All right. Do we see that?
Yes.
Perfect.
All right. Oops. So slide, you can go to 7.
7. Okay, perfect. Yeah. There we go.
All right, perfect. One of the things that as anyone working in the outdoor recreation and camping in particular pays attention to is not just that people are going out camping and recreating. It's how often do they do that? Because in the past we've known that there's a group, and when you look at this graph, you can kind of see the growth in the number of people who are out there multiple times a year. Because when you're preparing for a season, you don't just prepare for the number of people, but the fact that there's a lot more people camping a lot more frequently. So you can see that over 22 million households went camping 3 or more times last year, and that we're predicting that that'll jump by another 2 million households this year. I wouldn't be surprised if in 2021 we see that even higher. Just this is, you know, I when I do estimates in projections, I'm fairly conservative, and this is just using, you know, proportions from last year. So, but again, you kind of take those number of campers that are out there and start applying, you know, some percentages to it. The numbers get big real fast. Those once-a-year campers, there was a lot of them. That was your newbies that came out. They came out once this last year. Maybe they'll do it again. If all these new people, you're going to get that when you have a huge influx of new people. But it's still a lot of people taking to the outdoors on multiple occasions. So next, please. And here's the growth, just to, you know, simply to see that expressed as year-over-year proportion. You know, since 2014, we've seen a 121% increase in the number of people who camp 3 or more times a year. That's, you know, that's just over the course of, you know, 7 years. That's 6, 7 years. I mean, that's a lot. That's obviously a lot. And we're, you know, when we look at this next year, it's probably going to be 150% maybe. It's you just, you know, I keep emphasizing that point because I think it's really important that, you know, these people are out there multiple times, and again, it isn't just the number of households, it's how often they go camping. So, and here just, you know, again, to give you an idea of, you know, kind of the look ahead for this year. We're in the midst of it now, so but you know, that experienced campers, those are people who were not new to camping this past year. You can see that there's you know, an intent amongst that group to really camp more often, both nights and trips. And whereas you look at that new group of campers, and, you know, more than half don't intend to increase, so they're going to stay true to what they did this last year in general. So if they only went once, they'll probably only go once again. Again, it's a lot of people. You still have to account for it, but it's also a group that's not super engaged, and we'll get to that as we go through. Next. So again, looking here at the you know, how people are camping, I refer to this as preferred camping accommodation. It is not necessarily what people own. It is what they prefer to camp in and camp in most often. So I always feel like I need to make that distinction because you know, sometimes you'll see some other figures elsewhere. For example, the RV Industry Association has a study on RV ownership. Our numbers don't necessarily match, but when you start to look at, you know, the people who don't own in our study versus do, it actually dovetails with their work fairly well. But again, you can kind of see the numbers of people that, especially when we're predicting for this next year, the numbers of people who are going to be camping in cabins and the glamping accommodations. We're looking at it almost doubling, you know, over last year. So it's a lot of new people out there looking for those types of accommodations. And I think it's just going to keep increasing as time goes on. So, you know, again, you can, you know, the tenters are always going to be strong because tenting makes camping so accessible. A person can be prepared to camp using a tent without a great deal of expenditures on buying a lot of gear and equipment to camp. So tenting, I think, will always assume, you know, that prominent point within camping for that reason. Next slide, please. And here, just, you know, looking ahead, we're doing some, you know, again, some more look-aheads in our research, and we're looking to this coming summer and what people are planning to camp in. And, you know, again, this is where, you know, some of those, what you saw on the previous slide, those projections come from. And I have a comparison to what we reported for 2020, that NACR, that's the North American Camping Report. So again, you're still looking at a lot of tents, down a little bit maybe. the RVing is going to hold true, but again, that increase in the cabins and glamping, we'll see as the summer really gets rolling, and this is something that we'll be tracking throughout the year so that we can see where things actually end up. Okay. I wanted to address RV ownership because anyone who works in camping and outdoor rec knows that there are a lot more RVers on the road, using a lot of, whether it's the dispersed camping, the boondockers, to looking at campgrounds and Walmart parking lots. It's they're out there in droves now, and what we saw was a real bump in ownership this last year, and people went from just using an RV, maybe borrowing, renting, to ownership. We had a lot, the new people, they still aren't as likely to own, but with the number of new people, even a small increase in ownership equals a lot more RVs, and we saw a lot of experienced campers that bought RVs. People traveled in RVs because, because of COVID. We know that. We did some research last spring and fall that showed that people really viewed RVing as a much safer way to travel. They're traveling home with them, and they went out and purchased. They were much more likely to purchase for all those reasons, to the safety, security, feeling that it was just a better way for them to travel, to visit relatives, and so on. Okay. I put this topic in here, working in camping, because I do believe it's an important part of what we're seeing in terms of, especially the past year, and it'll probably continue into this year as well. And that is, a lot of people went camping because they were working and schooling remotely, and the ability to take your RV and go to a campground and be able to work and school and such was very appealing to people. But we're seeing a drop off. The plans for this summer are much less. You can see, last year you had 41% of campers who worked or schooled while they especially worked while camping, whereas this next year we're at about a third. So it's obviously dropped a little bit, but we'll see again as the summer plays out. These are plans, so again, and when you start to look at children in the household, much more likely. But that last column I think is important too, depending on what your role is in outdoor rec, and whether you're a private campground owner or just serving the industry. Is that these campers were these new campers really were looking at campgrounds with full facilities and obviously the Wi-Fi, and you can see that group really sticks out in terms of the fact that they were working and schooling their kids at campgrounds at a much higher rate. So again, probably private campground owners will tell you that, yes, we know this, but I think it's just interesting to quantify it and to see that group, again, we'll keep track of that and see what happens this year. I suspect we're going to see something fairly similar, at least for the first part of the summer. And again, how the school situation pans out in the fall. Okay. And again, I put this in for a similar reason. Just to kind of give. So the previous one. There we go. Okay, just looking at this again, if you're a campground operator or anyone working within the industry, that the influence of having Wi-Fi and people's ability to camp more often, you can see that really, it's been increasing, and this is something that we've been looking at for quite a while now. It was prior to 2017, it seemed like it had plateaued. We didn't see it a whole lot more, but in recent years, and obviously especially this past year, having Wi-Fi allowed people to get out a lot more often. So, again, it's an important factor. Not everybody likes it, but if people can be out camping and enjoying the outdoors, then maybe that's not such a bad thing. And again, you can see the number of extra days that people attribute to the technology. An extra 6 days on top of what they would normally get had they not had access. So I think it's important. Again, some people, everybody camps a little bit differently, but for some, some people with families, kids in school, their jobs, if they can go out and check emails a couple times a day, but still spend some time with their families in the outdoors, I personally think that that's a good thing. So anyway, just wanted to reinforce that idea that this is one of those things that's happening, and it's important, especially now. Okay, next slide, please. So the changing demographics. This is something I know a lot of people are very interested in. We've been tracking it, obviously, for a long time. When we first did just a basic incidence study back in 2012, camping was a very white activity. Obviously, and the industry overall. I mean, it's hard to pick up a newspaper, read a newspaper, whether it's online or picking it up, or any other media source, and not see an article about diversity and inclusion in the outdoors. And it's been a slog, since that time, but the progress is there, and the progress is real. It's one of those things. It's been a fairly continuous trend. We see that the people camping, the households are matching what our overall population is. I will adjust the census figures as when the new census is official and available. That will change too. So we'll probably not quite be there, based on that. But again, you can see the progress, and I wouldn't want to minimize the progress that we've made throughout the years, because I know that there's a lot of work still to do, but it's happening. The work is being done in some areas, and I think this is another great finding. So next slide, please. And the new campers. This is where things get, obviously very interesting. And we've seen, the new campers, since 2015 have been a much more diverse group than the overall camping community. And especially this last year, where, it was kind of like, well, we better double check our data here, because is this right? And it is, and everything else follows. But you see that, especially among Black campers, the increase was tremendous. And this new group who came out last year is just way, way more diverse than anything we've ever seen. And I think it's a testament to a lot of things coming together. I think there are people doing good work. I think that the pandemic obviously resulted in a lot of people wanting to get out of areas and getting out of the cities and so on, and younger people too coming out a lot stronger. So again, I think this is a great finding. I'm very encouraged to see this. It'll be interesting to see what happens this year. Will we match this? Will it rebound the other way? We'll see. But again, something that is anyone serving out. I know this is camping, but it does reflect outdoor recreation as well in many areas. And so the people I speak with, and just anecdotally, a lot of this rings true, that people are seeing on the ground a changeover in the diversity in the outdoors. So next slide, please. Looking at the generations, I think some of this is intuitive, because like Gen Z, wasn't old enough to be an adult and included at a certain point, and now they are. But I think especially when you see the new campers and how they're outstripping the the overall camping rates of participation. So you're seeing, especially this last year, you're seeing that 58% of new campers were millennials or Gen Z, and that again is showing. I know that I talk to a lot of people in the RV industry, and they're seeing it on the lots. People who are buying RVs and the level of interest. And if you talk, the campground owners are expressing this as well. So again, you have a much younger, much more diverse group of campers. And by the way, I mentioned earlier the new campers, the number of black campers who came in this last year in 2020 is now the youngest group of campers. It used to be Hispanics were the youngest group, but now black campers are the youngest group. So again, you're seeing, I think, some of the dividends of people working to get more people out into the outdoors and camping. Okay, who is the new camper? This is, besides demographics, obviously, this is more of kind of an attitudes, behavior section, some overall, but again, I think this is important, and it'll be a little clearer in a couple slides too, that we've asked this question throughout the years, like what gets people into camping? And so traditionally it's always people love the outdoors. They love the outdoors. They want to get outside. They want to spend more time in the outdoors. But this year, that new group of campers was different. And you can see very clearly that a third said it was a safer way to travel due to COVID. So again, you have a group of people who didn't come into camping based on what we would call the traditional ways, like we're kind of pushed out there a little bit. I think it's worth looking at too, the wanting to visit friends and family. We saw that in some research we did with the RV industry as well, especially around the holidays, where this desire, people still wanted to travel, they still wanted to see their families, and camping and RVing was a great way for them to do that. If they didn't want to travel by air. A lot of people were avoiding that for good reason. And so again, this group there's always a push and a pull and everything. And so with this group, I think they were pushed into it a little bit. There was less of a pull based on the love of the outdoors and such, but they were kind of pushed out due to some of these other external factors. Okay, next slide, please. And again, this is the same information, but I grouped some of those reasons just so you could kind of see here in a snapshot that COVID-related reasons were big in getting people out camping. Half of the new campers were mentioned that, working and schooling again, and the exploration, which has traditionally been a little bit higher. For this group, not quite as much. So again, it provides that clear picture of why people started camping this past year. Okay. And I know this is a little hard to read. Sorry about that. This year, but I wanted to make it clear, especially the portion on the right part of the graphic. It shows that this new group of campers this year, even though I mentioned tents will always be that introductory way of camping for most people, but you can see the cabins and glamping. I mean, that rate doubled from 2019 to 2020. So this is, the first time they went camping, what kind of accommodation did they use? RVing is constant, but the cabins and glamping, doubled, and tenting went down. So you had a group of people who new to camping, COVID put them out there, and they really took to cabins and glamping accommodations. Okay. And again, sorry, this type is a little small. Again, apologies for that. But I just wanted to, again, show where people's first camping experience was this past year. And you have, about, a third of those new campers who stayed at a campground that had a lot of facilities and amenities. But then another third who had moderate facilities, and the other third were kind of, distributed throughout. And it's not a lot different from how experienced campers, start camping. But, again, that first camping experience, and we'll talk about that in a minute about how important that is and what that results in. So, next slide, please. And, what type of experience was it? Not just the location, but what type of experience did people have for their, did they do in 2020? So the new campers, obviously you can see glamping is, way up there. And this was originally sorted by overall, so I should have sorted it by new campers, because down about 2/3 of the way down, you can see staying at a public campground, 43%. That obviously, I'm sure for a lot of people was really important this last year because they saw this. They saw these new people coming out camping and staying at these public facilities. So you kind of have, people on the one hand, going out and glamping, experiencing glamping, but then also looking at our public campgrounds that are, obviously, being a little bit stressed at the present time. So, but again, you can see that new group also was much more likely to experiment with different types of experiences. You had a lot of people who tried being full-time RVers for a while. That didn't stick, by the way. It seems glamorous at first, but for a lot of people, it's the reality of it's a lot different. So, but at least they tried it, and again, you saw that experimentation. You saw this group maybe trying to find their preferred way that fits them and their lifestyle and their family dynamics. So, again, and at the very bottom, you can see about a third, worked remotely or schooled their kids remotely while camping or glamping this last year. So, again, a lot of people out there trying some different things. I think the industry is actually responding fairly well to it overall. Okay. I have gear purchases in here because we wanted to know if people actually bought stuff for camping, this new group of campers. And you can see that they did, but not quite as much. Even the experienced campers, they're out buying new gear, it looks like. But you see a lot more in this new group. It's not surprising that they were more likely to borrow gear and so on. So, again, it's not quite as prominent. I think there's some nuggets in here depending on what part of the outdoor recreation you serve. But for example, people purchasing, a third of new campers purchased fishing gear, but the rate of people purchasing hunting gear for camping, I think, is really interesting because, again, that new group of campers, you might be tapping into some different groups of campers, some different demographics that don't necessarily appear in the things like income and ethnicity and such. So, again, there's some interesting stuff in here. Purchasing gear is an important factor, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, next slide, please. We had people rate their first camping experience as well, and again, just the new campers didn't have that great of an experience. There's a lot of reasons for that, but again, it wasn't that great for some people, and that's where some of the work I think will need to be done. You can see that couples, their first camping experience was the best overall. So to all the couples out there, they're coming back, whether they have children or not. So, again, just looking at, probably different planning, stuff like that goes into that. But the new campers overall, we have some work to do with that group. Okay, next slide, please. The new campers who had a great first experience, I won't read all of these, but camping is part of a group. If people camped as part of a group, they were much more likely to have a great first experience. Those who use camping to digitally detox, we asked that question. And, again, mission accomplished, apparently. They had a great first experience. But here, I just wanted to point out the purchase the tent or purchase the vehicle. Again, people who purchased something for camping were much more likely to have a great first experience. So, again, new RV owners too. But, again, this is kind of an important thing to look at, because when you're looking at the long term, who does and does not have fun while they're camping? And we are now beginning to figure out who some of those folks are. Okay. Here, the likelihood to continue camping, that new group of campers it's at risk. There's a third of them who are a little bit less likely to continue camping into the next year. So there's a bit of a leaky bucket here, and I think again, it depends on where you are in the industry, what your point of view is. We probably, overall, I would say people want to try to retain more of those folks, and especially when you only have 42% who are likely, who are much more likely. We need to do some things, but the next slide, I'll talk about that just a little bit. Again, I won't read everything to you, but the great first experience needs to be pleasant and low maintenance. That means people who camped at campgrounds that have a lot of facilities, that have a lot of services and amenities. If they camped at one of those campgrounds, they're much more likely to have a great first experience, thus much more likely to continue camping. Being part of a social group, again, that people, they're going with their friends, family members, and so on. They want to have that kind of experience, and that made them, they're much more likely to stay. I said they need to have skin in the game. They need to purchase something. If people are just borrowing and renting, they're much less connected, much less likely to continue. People who have a love for the outdoors are also much more likely to continue. The people who started due to COVID, much less likely to continue. So again, if they came up for the first time this last year because it was a safer way to travel due to COVID or COVID-related reasons, the ability to retain them is much lower because they didn't come up for the reasons we would like them to. And similarly, those who worked or schooled remotely all the time, a little bit less likely. Again, they don't have the same level of attachment to the outdoors. There was a lot of convenience, a lot of experimentation. But if that was the reason for them getting out, they were much less likely. What we need are people to be more attached to the outdoors. I think the more attached they are to, the better off we're all going to be in terms of keeping, not just keeping the people, but keeping our areas clean and in good shape. They're going to be much less likely to trash those areas. They're going to maybe follow some, the principles of having a lower impact when they camp. So again, we need people to be more connected. So we need to work at connecting them when they come out. Okay, next slide, please. I'm going to try to go through these quick. I know I'm a little behind. So this year, again, I'll just touch on these briefly. I don't think that these are, some of this information has already been out there, but camping is viewed as the safest form of travel, by quite a bit. My text doesn't match the graphic because I updated that. I apologize. But camping, people view camping as a safer way to camp as well. So, again, this is what drove a lot of that activity you saw in 2020 and early 2021. Excuse me. Okay, next slide. This year, again, briefly, just looking at crossover travel. Campers we know are a group that likes to travel. So, again, road tripping with an overnight stay. A lot of people see camping by definition as a road trip as well. So not a lot of surprise there, but you can kind of see that things are starting to open up here. These results have changed a lot over the last 3 months, where some of them are higher and some of them are lower as the reality of summer plans sets in, but camping has remained constant. So, okay, next slide, please. Here again, just a brief snapshot of what people's plans are right now. You know, this is not actual behavior. This is what they're looking at for this summer, and you kind of see the locations that are popular. One thing I would point out, and something to watch, and again, we'll be reporting on this moving forward, is the privately owned land, the rate of people camping on whether it's part of a listing or their own. It's growing, and it's growing quickly. So, you know, groups like HipCamp and their listings, it's really, really growing fast, and campers are taking to it. And they took to it a lot last year as well. In the overall report, we saw that. We saw it trending up, that, you know, again, away from crowds, so they can camp on private land. It was a real, plus it's absorbing some of that overflow. Okay. Next slide, please. Canceling and changing summer plans. You know, again, plans are solidifying. People are still, you know, there's only 22% who are still uncertain. That was much higher a couple months ago. It was like 37%. So plans are solidifying. People are less likely to change their plans. Those who do, again, it's still COVID that's driving it. So, you know, again, that, you know, again, probably not a big surprise, but people's plans are starting to solidify at this point, and I think we're having a good idea of what the summer is going to shape up to be. Okay, and the last slide is, again, this is a similar question, but with updated data from our new survey, and just so you have an idea that we're looking strong overall. You know, people wanting to camp, and those who don't, you know, we're going to again look at, you know, the concerns about COVID. That number has dropped dramatically, and it's one of those things that it's going to continue to drop, and we have some other, you know, measures that kind of, you know, that prop that up as well. So, you know, I think it's shaping up to be a solid summer, a good 2021 overall, and we're going to be monitoring it as we go. So there's a lot more information, there's a lot more data that we have, but we only had 45 minutes to do this. We can talk about it all day, but please feel free, anyone, to reach out to me with questions. If we have it, we'll share it.
Scott, thank you so much. That was so fascinating. I know that some of those data points you touched on are things that our office has kind of been thinking about and pondering all of last year into this year, of course. It was really interesting to see the actual data behind everything. And also, apologies on the tech side. My screen was showing to me in full screen, and it was not showing to all of you in full screen. So apologies about that. I guess kind of something that a question I'm going to pose to the audience quickly, just because I'm curious after seeing some of those stats about having access to Wi-Fi and working from home, schooling, or excuse me, working while camping, schooling while camping. Do people in the audience have a preference to go somewhere where they know they'll have Wi-Fi, or do they prefer to just be able to say, I'm off the grid and I'm completely off the grid, just because I know we do attract people who are very outdoorsy, of course, being the Office of Outdoor Recreation. So I'm just curious about that, based on what we saw. And also, if anyone has questions, feel free, of course, to put those in the chat, whether it's about how we saw different amounts of purchases for certain types of gear versus not. I know you mentioned, Scott, I think it was about a third of new campers were buying hunting or fishing gear, which seemed to be a little bit higher than some of the other gear. So I thought that was really interesting, especially as retail folks look at, you know, how are they planning, but also how do natural resource managers look at that and plan for the future as well.
I think the hunting thing especially, I think, is fascinating because it's a fairly large group of people, and there's a renewed interest in it, and we're starting to see that in some of our data. We also track recreation, you know, throughout the year, what people participate in, and hunting is one of those activities it's always been fairly low, but it's been sneaking up the last few years. I also wanted to add, by the way, that in the coming months, we are going to have much more regional and potentially state level information. We're building our information base on visitation and such. And so that's going to be coming out, and hopefully by the end of the summer, we'll be able to give you a decent idea of, for example, the visitation to Utah throughout the season. So that's coming. That's on the horizon. We don't have enough yet to be able to report that. The numbers are still too small.
That will be very, very fascinating to see. It looks like Robert asked a question. Thoughts on ways to continue educating new campers about fire safety, vandalism, and other sustainability issues that seem to be very prevalent these days?
Oh, this is where I think groups of campers come in, group pressure. I also think it's the responsibility of other campers, and in my opinion, some may disagree, to kindly point some of these things out. I'm here in Maine, and I know some of the folks there's some areas that are going to be closed probably because of the trash and the going on private property and such. It's like, I mean, it's a great question, Robert. I wish I had a better answer for you. I feel like it's everybody's responsibility. I know that a lot of people are out picking up trash on their own. They're taking garbage bags. I think that the influencers, the people who are getting these people out, need to make sure that they're reinforcing the idea of what is proper use of the area. What is, whether it's campfires to trash, vandalism, all those things. I mean, it's part of it is just simple volume, the volume of people. The more people you have, the more likely we are to have those incidents, unfortunately. And I don't know. I think it needs to be a focus. It needs to be a priority. I think the industry overall has been focused on just scrambling to manage all the people and get them into places. And, unfortunately, that's been the result.
Thank you. And we talked on our last webinar about several of these issues, and of course, wildfires especially keep coming up right now in Utah, just because we are in such an extreme drought right now, and we've got wildfires burning. So that's something, if folks have questions about that as well, please reach out to our office. We can put you in touch with the coordinator of that for the state. I'm seeing one other question come through from Tara. Are you hearing whether campers are liking the current reservation systems or prefer to get campsites upon entering campgrounds?
It's the new campers. They have such an uncertainty of what to expect that it's they want to see their campsites, but in most cases they have to reserve in advance. Especially at the private campgrounds or a lot of state national parks, if it's available, you have to reserve in advance to not know. Maybe look at a map or something like that. Overall, I would say not really, Tara. But a lot of that comes with experience, the experience of the campers. I've talked to some of the people who work for the state here in Maine, and it's a big problem. They spend a lot of their day talking with people about their campsites. So it's not working that great yet. Between the volume, campsite availability, but really lack of camper knowledge and experience is doing that. I know a lot of people are working on reservation systems right now, trying to improve them.
Thank you.
Oh, let's see. Another question.
We've got another one. I'll read it out loud just for the purposes of the recording. Allison asks, I work for San Juan County Visitor Services, and we saw a huge increase in campers headed to the backcountry throughout COVID, and we heard from so many of them that they were, quote, bringing everything with them and wouldn't need to stop anywhere before reaching their destination, end quote. We understand they were trying to be respectful and cautious with COVID, and we appreciate that, but we also wanted to encourage them to support our local businesses. Yes, Allison, thank you. Any suggestions or ways to encourage that supporting the local economy and the tourism economy?
That that's a challenge for everyone in the local area. I think, again, it comes with the overall education of the person coming to the area. If it's a permit-based system, there's a way, you have a touch point. It's difficult without having a touch point with that person prior to them arriving. For example, if they just show up on, say, BLM land at a trailhead, there may not be an opportunity to have that touch point with that person before they head into the backcountry. Part of it is, I would say your local chambers of commerce and your tourism bureau, all trying to get people to, again, it's the same kind of message as having a low impact when you're camping and being responsible. The idea that people just need to be aware. Part of it is people aren't aware of what the resources are in an area. They come to a new area and the first thing they're going to do is ask around. But if they have specialty gear, specialty food, and so on for their trip, if they're unaware of that, social media, I think is really the answer to that, because most of these people are going to be on social media of some kind prior to their visit. In fact, I have a backpacking trip coming up this summer, and I've been on social media myself more than I normally am, just seeing what other people's experiences have been in this area I've never been to. So I think the social media is really the way to go. People from every demographic and age group are on social media looking for information. I think that's really your best bet. And get your local merchants to really be a part of that and be active. And I know one of the things that happens, and it's hard sometimes for local merchants to do this, but is to keep things up to date and very engaged, even if it's just a few people, to work at building that and be consistent so that the people see their presence and that they're seen as that resource. And it's difficult, I know, but really it's just being consistent with that message and using the outlets that people, if you're looking at RVers, by the way, there's so many boards that people are on. There's one for everything you can possibly imagine. And whether it's boondocking to Airstreamers or whatever, there's one for everything. Those are places that you can join, be a part of, and be a part of the conversation. And you access a lot of people that way. So those are great ones. The same thing with backcountry campers and so on. But yeah, it's just getting people engaged. Again, I wish there was a simpler answer, but if I was in that situation, it was me, I would be on social media very aggressively, many times a day probably.
Thank you, Scott. And just I guess kind of a message to the audience, if any of you, because I do see a couple of tourism officials on this particular webinar, if any of you have messages that our office can share, please let us know. We're always happy to do that and post and put it in our newsletter and things like that. I am going to, because we are getting close to time, go ahead and draw a name from questions in the chat who will win a prize. We have got Allison Yamamoto Sparks. You are our prize winner. So if you could stay on the call for just a moment, I'll get your email and I'll follow up with you about that. That would be fantastic. Thank you for your question. Scott, I want to give you a huge thank you for being on the webinar today, presenting this information, and of course for all the research that you've put into this report over the years, for participating in the summit as we get close to that. And a few months, we're very excited for that. Thank you for your time and all the work you put into this, and thank you for our audience for being on today.